Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Bottled Up Podcast. And this is not one of the standard everyday episodes. This is the one episode a year where we do a throwback, but not the typical Bottled Up throwback, but a throwback in the sense of we tell a story this week in the span of roughly 15 to 20 minutes. That's the goal every week, to get everything condensed within that short period of time so you can listen to this on your way to work, whatever, assuming you're working on Saturdays. And if you are, boy, that stinks. But this is the goal for this week. We're going to tell the story of the greatest car that ever raced in NASCAR, and it only ran for one race. And we are focusing this week on Jeff Gordon's TRex car. Now, some of you may know the story already, and some of you may have already listened to my episode of Bottled Up where we talked to Ray Evernham, and that was one of the coolest interviews I've done. But you might have noticed we didn't touch on the TRex car. And that was just the way the interview turned out. It wasn't intentional to leave it out or anything else. But the story of the TRex car begins with a challenge from the owner of Hendrick Motorsports, Mr. Hendrick. And his challenge was, take the NASCAR rulebook, all hundreds of pages long that it is, and build the perfect race car. And he assigned this challenge to all of his crew chiefs, all of the engineers, and said, go to our head engineer and give him your ideas, and we will build the perfect race car. And at the time, Ray Evernham was the best crew chief, probably still is the greatest crew chief in history, arguably. And he took this car and he put it together, and this was actually used as a test car. They would bring this car to track test days, go out, run it, see how it ran, and that was their typical plan with that car. They used it for testing up until it was time for the All-Star race in 1997. So, like I mentioned, this car was used for testing, and they said, we're going to race this car. So they go out, and they're running laps, and they're about 2 or 3 tenths off from what they were expecting to run in one of their standard cars. They bring the car in. Jeff Gordon basically gave the impression of, this car has something, I can't put it into words, but it can be better. I need something else in it. So Ray Evernham, being the crew chief genius that he is, basically went and did some things unheard of at that time in a stock car. Softer front springs, stiffer rear springs, a larger sway bar in the back. Basically, this car had different aspects of it all put together that individually might have thrown off the handling of the car, but together created what ultimately turned into the perfect storm. So they send the car back out. And as Ray Evernham tells it, you've probably all heard the video interview that Hendrick Motorsports released last year. Ray Evernham was up on top of the truck with a couple of other engineers, and they're all up there with their stopwatches, and Gordon makes a lap. Ray clicks the stopwatch, and he looks down at it, reading the tenths, part of the second, and sees that it's about a tenth quicker, and he goes, oh, that's not bad. We're gaining time. And he's, everyone else up there is celebrating. He gets a slap on the back, and he goes, what's wrong? And he looks down at the stopwatch and reads the full thing. It wasn't a tenth faster. It was 1.1 seconds faster. He didn't read the seconds portion of the stopwatch. And, Jeff Gordon took it back to the pits. They were all blown away at how well the car performed. And they go out. They run it in the 1997 All-Star race. Jeff Gordon starts 19th out of 20 cars. And he slices up the field and takes home the win $200,000+ later, and Jeff Gordon has won in the TRex car, this one-of-a-kind car that was put together as part of a challenge by Hendrick Motorsports. And everybody's celebrating because now they have the ultimate race car. This thing it's perfect. It was a full second faster than the field. That just doesn't happen. It didn't happen back then, and it certainly doesn't happen now. And at the end of the race, Ray Evernham received a call from Brian France. And he thought it was going to be a congratulatory meeting. He was going to congratulate him, wish him well on building such a fantastic race car. And at this point, the car had already passed tech inspection, pre-race and post-race, everything else. This car was legal per the rule book. And so Ray goes into the meeting, and he's ready for it. He's thinking, oh, I'm going to be congratulated. I've built this perfect race car, and Jeff Gordon, the best driver in the field, has gone out and won with it. And he walks in, and he's told to sit down. And Brian France says to him, pick up this phone and call your boss. And Ray is confused. He goes, well, why? That car is not legal. Oh, no, sir. It passed tech inspection. This car is perfectly legal. It's within the rulebook. We built it using the NASCAR rulebook as a guideline. It is just the perfect car. Ray, I'm going to tell you something. That car's not going to be legal tomorrow. So they had that car, essentially that car, banned from NASCAR. Not because it was illegal, not because anything was wrong with it, not because it broke any rules. Purely because it was so fast, it could not be allowed to race. And that's just the story of how it is. And it's grown in legend. It's one of the most notorious stories told around the garage. A lot of people believe to this day that there was something illegal in that car, but when you go back and look at it, Jeff Gordon, at one of the best years in his career, he was riding the high wave there, goes from 19th to 1st, drives through the field in the All-Star race, not even for points, just straight up for money, drives through the field and wins it. And that car was run again, chassis number 2429, has run multiple races, but after they took out the adjustments that they made because they were deemed illegal, that car was never able to run the same. And you can actually go see this car at the Hendrick Motorsports Museum. It's still on display. And the reason I'm telling this story this week, partially, is because it's Throwback Week, and I like to tell a story. And that's going to become a yearly tradition where this episode of Bottled Up for Darlington Throwback Weekend, we tell the story of a car throughout history. This year, in the first inaugural episode, Jeff Gordon is my favorite driver of all time. You know, if I get to be biased, Jeff Gordon is my favorite driver of all time. I grew up watching him. I got to meet him, one of the first drivers that I met, and it's just that was an unbelievable experience. But I've told that story many times before, and that's the car we're going with this year. The TRex car, so fast that it got banned, and it still lives on as one of the most famous cars in history. And so much so, in fact, that the reason that got my wheels spinning on this and wanting to tell this story is that, as I mentioned, it's Throwback Week. This is going to become a yearly tradition for Bottled Up. But also, on the iRacing side of things, I always find a way to tie it back into iRacing. I'm actually going to be running the Bottled Up version of the T-Rex car. It's still got, the T-Rex on the hood, but instead DuPont on the rear quarter panels. It's bottled up. That is the coolest thing in the world, I think. I absolutely love this car. You can see this car, over on Twitter, at Bottled Up Radio. Give me a follow there. That's where I interact the most with fans. That's where I do the most conversation. That's where I retweet. As soon as I hear confirmed news from, a reliable source, that's where it goes. So this podcast is not just Jeff talking, once a week about NASCAR, because I talk about NASCAR a lot more than once a week. But we're also journalists here at Bottled Up. So we are looking into stories all the time. There is more to the Dipple story that is going to be coming out soon. And I'm not sitting here saying I'm going to break the story or anything else. But there are certain leads that are being followed that I'm aware of. Not to say there's some grand conspiracy or anything. There's not. I promise you. But with the wording of the NASCAR ruling, a lot of people are looking into it. So that's your weekly Dipple update. And this is being recorded on Monday. So keep that in mind. The news may break during the week, in which case the first place to find it would be at Bottled Up Radio. And by the time this episode releases, you'll see it there. But as of Monday, Tyler Dipple is still suspended. No word as to why. But keep in mind, NASCAR, if he was suspended for drugs, would have said he was eligible. They would say he was suspended for drugs, and they would say he's eligible for the Road to Recovery program. So it seems to me that this is not drugs. It also seems to not be a legal issue, because nobody's found a police report, either in America or Canada, citing him in a crime. So he hasn't been mentioned in a police report that anyone has found yet. So I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but I'm saying if it does, in the past 5-6 days, nobody has found it. So bear in mind that Tyler Dipple was not suspended for drugs. He was not suspended for breaking the law. It was conduct unbecoming of a race car driver. I don't think it was anything on social media because nobody's said anything, retweeted it, screenshotted anything. But keep in mind that this is a developing story still. The Tyler Dipple story is developing. People are always looking into it. I can assure you there's a lot of people behind the scenes looking into this, myself included, but you have to keep in mind that once the story is understood and you get people saying what happened from a journalist perspective, you get people saying what happened and telling you what they know, this all has to be confirmed before the story can break. And again, I'm not saying I have anything. I don't. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. As soon as I were able to confirm the story, I would have it out there. But there are other journalists that are talking, and the consensus that I've gotten is there's a few theories floating around, but it's just, you can't do anything with the information until it's proven, unfortunately. So that story is still developing and will be out soon, I'm sure. So this episode of Bottled Up was to Throwback, and I mentioned iRacing earlier and never really got to it. I'm running the scheme in iRacing, so that's going to be absolutely awesome. It's one of my favorite weeks in iRacing, and I always mention that you can buy bottled up paint schemes and everything else. Unfortunately, this one is not for sale. This one was made one of a kind, and I was given very clear instructions to specify that this is not for sale. So, but if you want other bottled up schemes or your own throwback scheme made for, let's say you don't like the TRex car. For whatever reason, you don't like the TRex car, and we'll have a separate conversation about that if you don't like it, because I think it's one of the greatest stories. But let's say you want to throw it back to Anthony Alfredo's late model scheme when he was racing over for Junior Motorsports. Or you want to throw it back to 2009 Jimmy Johnson. Or 2006 Carl Edwards. Or 1993 Dale Earnhardt. Whatever you choose. If you go over to Midwest Motor Customs, take one of those cars, give them a picture of it, that car can be recreated usually pretty quickly. They are fantastic at getting cars out quick. Lowest prices I've seen, pretty fair pricing. And you can go and run your own scheme. Maybe slap a bottled up logo on there. That would be pretty cool. And if you do have any sort of bottled up stuff on your car, make sure to send it over to me on Twitter. I will retweet it and get the word out because I think that's the coolest thing. I know there's some people that are running bottled up truck schemes and everything else. That is the coolest thing. If you want a bottled up sticker, shoot me a DM. I'm giving away stickers for free. There's only a few remaining, so make sure to get your DM in. And by the time this releases, I know I'm recording early and all that, as I mentioned earlier. By the time this releases, I will be sure to have stickers for anyone that wants them. I promise you, you will get one if you'd like one. But they're cool, 4 inches by 4 inches, which is slightly larger than average, but hey, go big or go home. Fortune favors the bold. And another thing, one of our favorite groups of people here on Bottled Up is Rent a Race Car. And basically, Stafford Motor Speedway, you show up, you pay the guy, you get to drive in actual real street stock in an actual NASCAR race. You will forever go down as a NASCAR driver because you get points for the race. You will be nationally ranked. Probably not very well if you're only doing one race. But still, you're going out there, you're competing. These are cars that can finish top 10, top 5 if you have a really good run with some luck. They have won before. They field a car regularly every week that runs. Let's see, that's Chris Danielchuk in the 94. They call him Mayor McCheese because of his fire suit. But he went out, he finished 7th last week, 8th the week before that. He's on a top 10 tear right now. And he had a top 5 going until he had to dodge a wreck. But basically, I think he got into the grass a little bit, and that slowed him down. And so he had to just dodge the wreck and get around it so that's not to destroy his car. But they field that car every week, the 94, plus a couple others with renters in them, so usually 2 or 3 renters every week. It's just an awesome organization. There's a bottled up sticker right on the side of those cars, which I think is the coolest thing, right behind the driver side window. That frame, part of the roof where it connects to the chassis, the lower part of the chassis, there's a bottled up sticker slapped right there on all the cars, and that is the coolest thing in the world. So if you have any interest in driving a real actual race car, those are the guys to go see. So they race at Stafford. If you beg and plead enough, I'm sure they're willing to make an exception and go to another track, but you didn't hear that from me. Usually they just run Stafford, and because that's where their cars are set up for, and that's where they run best, is they just absolutely tear it up at Stafford. So go check them out, and thank you all so much. I know this was a bit of a all over the place episode, but we did what we wanted to do. We took the first half of the episode, told a story of probably the greatest race car of all time, the greatest race car to only run one race. And as I mentioned, the chassis ran other races. It was a completely different setup because that old setup was banned per NASCAR. So really, when you look at the quote-unquote TRex car, really only ran one race. And it won it, and it won it in dominant fashion. So if you have any other stories that you want to hear told, we are more than happy to tell more stories here on Bottled Up. Perhaps this will become a regular segment, but I can tell you this. Every year during Throwback Week, this is going to be the topic. We're just going to go back, tell a story from the history of NASCAR. If you want your story told next year, shoot it to me now. Start the research. I'll record it in advance maybe. Who knows? But thank you all so much for listening into this week's episode of Bottled Up, and I hope you enjoyed.